Hey, peace, family. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club. I am Kimbo Ajore, organizer, host, We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club, member of the Uhuru movement, professor of history. Um, that's part of my resume right there. What's up, Natasha?
Good morning, Grand Rising, everyone. My name is Natasha. I am a educator, student, community activist, member of the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition, Free Them All. So I'm glad to be here. And Mutulu Shakur, who is one of our elder political prisoners that was released a couple months ago, has recently transitioned. So all of our prayers and blessings of peace um, go to his family, and we hope that he makes his transition to the ancestral realm and has a smooth journey on his transition to the ancestral realm. So
Yeah, appreciate you uplifting Dr. Mutulu Shakur. Yes, Freedom All, Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who at least that the thing these colonizers could do is let him come home for the last few months that he had. Because I think maybe last year sometime they said he may only had a year or a little more than a year to live, um, because he had I think it was, what is it, bone cancer or something like that. So it was good he was able to spend time with his family. Um, he still, held the line when I heard him speak on the Zoom call. He still, I feel like nothing changed in regards to what he wanted Black people to do in regards to organizing and liberating ourselves, and understanding that the U.S. is an imperialist country and colonial state. So I say that to say, Dr. Mutulu Shakur was still on it despite all of the time. They could not break Dr. Mutulu Shakur. So definitely appreciate all the work that he had put in, and all our political prisoners, home and behind walls, and continue to put in. So, make sure that you're supporting our political prisoners, whether they are behind the walls or former political prisoners. Make sure that you're supporting some way, somehow, because it was them yesterday. It could be us today, behind those walls, because of the work that we're doing. We're doing liberation work. We charge colonialism is about decolonization process, charging the U.S. government, charging not just the U.S. government, but the European powers of colonialism. Because though African people inside the United States represent a domestic colony, we look at African people around the world and their relationship to the European power as a colonial relationship. So we charge colonialism to all of them. Welcome, Frank. You want to introduce yourself? Appreciate you being here.
Hey everyone, this is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Persuasion Educational Lecture Series.
All right, man. We all here. We just talking about Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who just transitioned.
Yeah.
Want to appreciate everybody too that's joining us. Make sure you like and share, this podcast, book club. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed. Let's get people to get as many people as we can to be engaged in these discussions. I'm actually happy you're here, Frank, because your story, man. I want to lead off with your story. we got to get into that right there, man. So many layers. I'm still trying to grapple with it, but I'll let you tell it, and then we can, discuss it.
Yeah.
And and also for everybody who I got to put the link in the chat. I'm gonna put the link to our Google Drive. We're reading "Stolen Black Labor" by Malia Shatella. We'll be reading that in the second half of this podcast. But before we get into the book examination, we All right, going to start off with our weekly roundup. Whatever you're ready, Frank, you can go in.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me put it out. So we are going to talk about. Let me see right here. I think this is it. Okay. All right. So this is an article that just came out about lab-grown meat in the U.S. that have been approved by the FDA. So it is currently going on. Actually, it is on the market already. So this company have been into business for some time now, but they've been selling their meat in China. All right. So I'm even thinking that this company, the coronavirus, it might have even come from there because let me see. So let's just read here. So it said Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. So this is it right here. So the chicken or the meat you see right there is not organic. It was grown from the lot. So it says cultivated meat, also known as lab grown meat, has been cleared for sale in the United States. So it says Upside Food and Good Meat, two companies that make what they call cultivated chicken, said Wednesday that they have gotten approval from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to start producing their cells-based protein. Good Meat, which is owned by plant-based egg substitute market Eat, just said that production is starting immediately. Cultivated or lab-grown meat is grown in a giant vat, much like what you would find at a beer brewery. So it says, last week, Good Meat and Upside Down said they has received approval for label for its product from the USDA. In March, Good said it has received a so-called no question letter from the Food and Drugs Administration. That letter stated that the administration is satisfied that the product is safe to sell in the United States. The FDA issued a similar letter Upside Food in November. Now, the Good Meat, which has been selling its product in Singapore, advertised its product as meat without slaughter, a more human approach. A more humane approach to eating meat. Singapore hope that cultivated meat will help fight climate change by reducing the need for traditional animal agriculture, which might greenhouse grasses. But let me just stop here because I don't want to take more time. So let me see here. Let me take it out here and come back up here. Yeah. So now this is a lab grown meat produced in the US that have been approved by the FDA of the USA to sell lab grown meat in or on the market, which of course it is already there. Okay, so some of the meat you even eat at McDonald's or some of the stuff you see in a grocery store very fresh, and those are lab grown meat that we are already eating. And this company have been selling their meat in China, Singapore for so long. So when we are also saying we also saw the rise in coronavirus, and they were talking about it's from meat, it's from bat. Who be that this whole coronavirus also came from this meat because it is a lab grown food. So could it be that somebody tamper with it and they have more chemical into this food and they send to how do you call it, China, and start killing people and it spread? Could it be that case? Now, you having a lab grown meat. First of all, look at in the black community specifically, we are fighting for black people here because if they are growing, first of all, they were not selling lab grown meat, and the food they bring to our community is already poison. So that alone, they allow you to start growing meat with poison Just imagine how many poison that will go in black body. Just imagine the byproduct of that lab grown meat that will be coming to black community, black neighborhood, into our food and so forth and things. So it is dangerous. I don't really know how to explain it because this is against human nature. For real, it's against human nature. You don't have to sell lab grown food. I mean, allow people to go grow their own food. Give land to people to go grow their own food. I mean, black people want to make farm, but you deprive them from having land, and you give them bad seeds, and then you want to grow lab grown food to bring it to them. And, I mean, you guys can go ahead because I'm out of war. Actually, the wars are there, but I'm just out of war. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, and I think what you said in terms of just the fact that we don't need to be creating lab grown meat, and two, eating it on top of that, because the earth is here to provide for us. So when we think about even the selling of food in the way that that it's done today, as opposed to, being able to go and, maybe forage for food in a way that is not so tied to like capitalism, or being able to farm for your farm and grow your food, or farm and grow enough food for other people to have enough too, as well, or to trade with it. We don't That is what we need to be doing, and that is what we've been doing, for a long time. And I think this is all part of the process of continuing industrialization, because if you're saying that, and what did I think you said something about, like, they said something about like reducing the carbon footprint, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Agriculture and growing meat only expedites or increases carbon output when we're overproducing. Even the amount of meat that is produced to for people to eat is overkill. The amount of meat that they produce, shouldn't even be producing that amount of meat for people to eat that amount of meat. When we think about like companies, and how companies are behind how much meat is sold and produced, especially when we think about the United States, one of the ones who produces the most carbon. Like when we think about Africa, they don't, they produce 3% of whatever emissions that are affecting the earth. So places like industrial places like China, like America, like India, those are the places that are producing most of it. And even when we're thinking about producing a lot of meat, that has to do with a lot of the ways that America is producing meat in a ways that it shouldn't be. So the answer definitely is not to go ahead and grow lab grown meat that we're going to ingest into our bodies, that, like you're saying, we don't know what's going to be inside of those things. The earth works with us. So when we get food, our bodies know how to process it, because it comes from the earth, because we come from the earth. our body our bodies interact with plants and animals. We breathe and recycle the same air and water vapors. So our bodies are already in tune with the types of vegetation that are growing around in our environments. These lab grown things have no connection to us whatsoever. And in the same way, it's hard for our bodies to digest foreign things that are unrecognizable, like even McDonald's per se, where studies have shown that, the McDonald's French fries, your body doesn't know how to process that stuff because it's so processed already. And a lot of the processed things that we already eat, our bodies can't process. So to now say that we should be eating meat that is processed in labs goes against just our own bodily functions and our own health. And so, and we know that in America, they really allow a lot of things to be sold that other countries, with outside of the United States, don't allow to be sold, because they understand the effect it has on the body.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I think we need a whole show just to speak on this topic right here. I have so many thoughts. I mean, you brought up the overconsumption piece to it, which is a problem. But I'm thinking it all goes together with capitalism, overconsumption. I'm thinking about the competition in capitalism, where you have this lab grown meat competing with uh, organically grown food, we're farmers. How are farmers in the long run going to be able to compete with people who are growing meat in these factories or labs, right? So they're having to compete with these corporations when it comes to providing food for the public. And so where does that put humanity at in regards to what they have will be able to have access to at some point, where everything at some point may be grown in the lab, nothing being organic, because possibly because of the price of organic food may skyrocket. It's just how capitalism is, because the production of this lab grown meat will be so cheap. You'll have people who are going to be consuming or buying lab grown meat in comparison to the high price of maybe food that is organic and so forth, unless they can compete. But we know in the long run how capitalism is, it's going to be hard for the small farmer to compete with these major corporations. The other thing I wanted to, last point, and then we can go to, well, Frank, if you had any last point, but I just wanted to pull this up real quick. You came with this fire story, man. So I know we spending some time on it. But I did a research paper one time on the Diamond versus Jacobardi case, and I was inspired by the film Corporation, documentary Corporation, and I saw a piece in that Corporation where they were talking about corporations being able to patent life. So I just want to encourage people to look into this case if you're not familiar with it, Diamond versus Jacobardi. I think they went to trial in 79, and perhaps maybe in 1980 the case was decided. But as you can see right here in the syllabus, says Title 35 USC 101 provides for the issuance of a patent to a person who invents or discovers any new and useful manufacture or composition of matter. Respondent filed a patent application relating to his invention of a human-made genetically engineered bacterium capable of breaking down crude oil, a property which is possessed by no naturally occurring bacteria. A patent examiner's rejection of the patent application claims for the new bacteria was affirmed by the Patent Office Board of Appeals on the ground that living things are not patentable subject matter under 101. The Court of Customs and Patent Appeals reversed, concluding that the fact that the microorganisms are alive is without legal significance for purposes of the patent law. So, in a nutshell, it don't matter if it's alive or not organic. That don't have anything to do with us being able to patent it and own the rights to it. So this particular case stop sharing. This particular case allows for corporations to be able to this Supreme Court decision allows for corporations to be able to own the rights to life, to living organisms. Now, from my research, they can own the rights to living organisms as long as it's not a newborn baby. So that's the limitation. But they can take organisms and they can give birth to a baby, take genes from here and there, and own the rights to it. So when we see in those films and they be talking about these clones, they can actually clone a human being and own that human being. Like, this is real life. Animals as well. And so I'm just bringing this up because I think it relates to this particular story that you're telling. But Frank, I'm gonna give you the last word, and I want to go to Natasha's story, and I'll save my story.
No, we can go ahead.
Okay, all right.
My story is about the uprisings that are happening within France, and so I'm just gonna share my screen really quickly. So in France, there was a police shooting of a 17-year-old boy from, I believe he's from Algeria.
Yeah.
And so initially, so the story is what's behind unrest in France. Violent riots convulsed French cities after the police officer shot a 17-year-old. The
You have to
interior.
share it. It's not shared.
Oh, it's not sharing? Really? It
Mm-mm.
says it's sharing.
I got you.
Oh, I think Akimba had to put it up on the screen. Okay. So it says the interior minister said 45,000 officers were deployed across France overnight on Saturday. As I said, it was a young boy who was actually shot for driving in a bus lane. And the officer pulled him over, as it says here. Um, and then, so when he got stuck in traffic, the officers approached the car, the officer shot him. And initial reports said that the police said that the teenager had driven into two police officers, but a video that came out after the fact showed that the officer shot at the boy while he was driving away, and there was no immediate danger. And so there's this incident that's happened that has really made it so a lot of people are fighting against the government and police shootings, because also this is not the first death of teenagers by police within France. So there were two teenagers in 2005 that were killed as by after being chased by police and trying to get away, and were electrocuted on a electrical tower. And then there was an uprising in 2005, and then there was another police shooting of another boy in 2007. Again, you had more uprisings. So this is a continuous legacy of police shootings and police terror, basically, in France. And so a lot of people who are within France, a lot of the African people and who have migrated to France have been experiencing police brutality, just as those people, Africans here in America, who live here and also experience police brutality. And so we see, the expression of the oppression that African people are exposed to in many of these different places where they live. In terms of what's happening to, and putting it into context in terms of what's happening to Black people worldwide. We also see things happening in the Middle East with African people migrating into the northern part of Africa, going into the Middle East so that they can go into Europe. And we know that all of this migration that's happening is part of the colonial, neo-colonial practices that exist today that are driving African people to leave their countries within Africa and go into these European countries up in Europe, or go over into America, because a lot of these countries are being affected by the neo-colonial policies that are being hatched by countries in Europe, like France, like England, uh, like Italy, like America. And so once these African people who have migrated to these places get there, they're still living in areas that are substandard, where they live in working class neighborhoods, some of them struggling to pay, and also not being able to get the same resources that the other populations within that country get as well. And so I think it's important for us to note this story, because our when we talk about colonialism here and ending colonialism, it's a global struggle. And so we always have to remember that. And I think a lot of the times when we talk about colonization, people think colonization is over, but it's still going on. And the neo-colonial processes that exist today, whether it's colonial governments meddling in the elections, funneling, creating wars within these countries where people are having to flee, having them have backward economic practices that link them to, like, let's say, in France's case, where 14 African countries are having to put most of their resources in terms of their state, what's the word I'm looking for, their state banking system, basically most of their money into France's banking system. And then through these unfair aid deals, and through the IMF loans, and all of these neo-colonial practices that are enacted upon African countries that are driving the migration. And then once these people get there, they're experiencing police brutality, racism, and all of this because of the continuation of colonization. So I think it's really important for us to follow these stories and make the links between what's happening to us here on the continent and also in Europe, no matter where African people are migrating to.
I mean, well, you said it. Appreciate you bringing this story up. That's why I wanted to go to your story rather than mine for the sake of time, because I thought it was important that we discuss this. But it definitely shows the connection with the colony of France, the colony of France and the colony of the United States, um, in the same relationship with the African population in regards to just like uh, the first of all, you're looking at this contradiction where there's this dependency on the colonized on on the colonizer, where they have to leave or flee their own countries, migrate to the border, go cross their borders and live within the under the oppressive state, directly under the oppressive government of France, whether it's France, Britain, or the United States. The same country that is causing the contradiction in the country where they are coming from. So that's serious. And so they go there to help build up the economy of France, but they're still looked at and treated as the other. That's the other part. Like, no matter what you do or how good your French is and how you dress, you'll never be French. No matter how hard you try, you're still African at the end of the day. And when the contradictions, I think, within the colony, when they're the most pronounced, that's when you're going to find out who you really are. They're going to show you who you really are. They're going to put you in your place. And Malcolm X went to France back in '65, and they prevented him from going to speak in France for the very fact of what he would expose that going on in the United States. But because France and the United States have a vested interest as the European powers to maintain their control over the whole African population, whether it's on the continent or in the diaspora. France did the bidding of the United States, who asked them not to let Malcolm speak, right? So it just shows that they'll unite and work together when it's in their best interest, especially when it pertains to the African working class. But go ahead, Frank. You can jump right in.
Yeah, let me just add you see, like Natasha brought it out, giving sequences of events that have happened. So the question then become, why this time around this became a very huge issue where it have to call national attention. All right. And as you watch a video, you saw what happened to George Floyd, where everybody were involved, right? That's how this little boy, or 17 years old boy, issue, have really become in front. So it was not just African that were on the same, demonstrating and putting out their anger. Now, you see, whenever things happen to Black people, right, or to African people, and we react, they don't see the reason why we react. They think that we are reacting based on what just happened. No, we are reacting because of the systemic issue. We are reacting because of how people have ignored Black struggle, Black issue, Black complaint, Black tears. And that's why we complain. That's why we do things, and that's why we react. But they don't look at it that way. And then they go on to say, call our names and all kinds of things that we don't reason is right. That's the same thing that happened in France. There were other, how they call it, white folks. There were other French, national who also jumped. Why did they jump? They jumped because of the hardship. You see it? So some of them, I'm not saying they were not protesting or they never joined a group because of the 17 years old boy, but some of them because there's an issue that has been going on for so long for Macron to leave office. They've been behind him to leave office. So this boy, Dev, also play part for those people to come out to actually voice out for Macron to leave. And this is something that been going on since 2020. Okay, protests been going on since 2020, but mainstream media don't show it because they don't want to show the ugly side of Europe to the world. And why this been going on? It been going on because, look, as African people are waking up, it become problem for the West. This issue been going on in France because the nation in France that France been exploiting, that France been getting 500 billion a year. Those monies are not going into the French economy. Those nations in Africa are holding back. They are not sending those taxes again. So situation in France are becoming difficult, are becoming hard. Poverty are increasing on a daily basis. So when one thing's happen, people use that to send signal, to send messages. And this is what exactly African people have been going through, African people have been doing, and they are not listening. And now it's happening to them. And it is good that it's happening to them. Not that we support what's going on in France, but hey, in order for the bully to stop bullying you, they have to experience what you go through. And it is good that they go through it so that they can know how African people feel. And they are going through it. That does not mean we want to recognize or reconcile with them. We want to reconcile with African and the African continent and African nation around the world so that we can take our place. And by we taking our place, it does not mean we are going to be black supremacists or black supremacists to influence on other people. We don't have time. We don't have time for that. We just taking our place because enough is enough.
Yeah, appreciate that. So yeah, that's going to wrap up the weekly roundup. I'm going to save my story, but I was, just to let people know what I was going to cover. Delaware House approves bill allowing business entities to vote in towns' municipal elections. So, business entities, corporations, banks, so forth, would be allowed to vote in municipal elections in Delaware if this bill is signed into law. It passed the House, the Senate did not pass it, but it could be brought back up. But with the Senate's approval or passing of this bill and the signing by the governor, corporations, and they're actually in some municipalities already voting and so forth. And Delaware is not the first or only state that has municipalities that allow for corporations or business entities and non-residents to be able to vote in local elections. So it's just something to stay aware of. We'll talk more about this at another date. We're going to go into the book reading. I want to appreciate everybody too for joining us as usual. And I need y'all to like and share the podcast, like and share, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. We Charge Colonialism. We're reading Stolen Black Labor. I'm going to pull it up on the screen. But you can also click on the Google Drive I had put in the chat earlier so that you can have access to the book yourself. And I'll repost the Google Drive right there. There's some other books in there you might want to take a look at as well. All right. So we're reading from chapter 2 today. Chapter 2, Chattel Slavery, Primitive Accumulation of Capitalism. And let's get into it. 1619 to 1865. And so we know in 1619, the first enslaved Africans brought into the English colony took place. Came on a ship called the White Lion. These weren't the first enslaved Africans to come to the Americas in general, because enslaved Africans have been coming since the 1500s, early 1500s, being brought over by the Spanish and Portuguese. When in 1619, you're going to have 20 Africans, 20 something Africans being brought into the English colony, what is now the United States, which is going to set the set off the slave trade in the English colonies and the instituting of a slave system. So start from the top. In the course of this chapter, the amount of reparations owed to African people by the U.S. government and ruling class due to the period of chattel slavery will be calculated. More importantly, the process of this calculation will reveal the nature of the slave system, the way that capitalism came into being, and the social struggle for freedom which African people carried out. And just a little context, I think this was published in 1981 or 82. Um, so we have that understanding of when this book was written and just the context that it was written in. So primitive accumulation: from the time African people were first enslaved by the Portuguese in the 1490s, and the first brought to North America by the Dutch in 1619, and to the end of chattel slavery in 1865, African people's labor was stolen to provide the primitive accumulation for capitalism. And I just want to say, just a correction, like the Portuguese began taking Africans into Europe in the 1440s. I think 1444, you have 200 Africans in the area known as Nigeria that were brought into Europe. So even before Columbus set sails and comes to the Americas, there was this trade taking place from Africa to Europe, the trade in enslaved Africans. In the early sugar plantations of the Caribbean, the concentration camp labor colonies were infamous centers of extraction of wealth from the very bodies of African laborers. The central law of profit, which was exposed by Marx, is that the capitalist pays the worker for his or her labor power, that is, only so much as is necessary for the laborer to survive and reproduce herself through raising children from the future generations of laborers. The capitalist then works the laborer to a much greater degree than paying for the value of his labor power requires, and makes a profit by selling the commodities thus produced. Such a system, however, only operated after enough wealth had been accumulated to give the capitalist the power to control production by controlling the tools of advanced production, factories, and then only operated for white workers. But the primitive accumulation of capital, the amassing of wealth in the form of goods to sell and transportation means and factories, was based on a much more cruel system, chattel slavery. In the slavery system, workers were not compelled to come work for the capitalist because he controlled great factories known as the means of production. No, African workers were compelled to work for the primitive merchant capitalists because they used extreme force and violence, carried out a degree of kidnapping and human cruelty never before seen on the face of the earth. Moreover, African workers held as slaves were not at all paid the value of our labor power, but literally worked to death. The early European capitalists, after driving native peoples, American Indians off the land, did not even bother to recompense African laborers enough to come close to survival and reproduction levels, since they could be replaced by new importations of African people from the continent. Life expectancy of an African worker who got to the Caribbean was no more than 5 or 6 years. For Britain in the 16th and 17th century, the slave trade and the sugar triangular trade was the basis for the concentration of capital leading to the first factories and the beginning of the modern capitalist system. By 1725, Britain had 163 ships in the slave trade, and by 1750, 396 ships were taking Africans as slaves. Why did the slave merchants set up plantation colonies in the Americas, which required a perilous and expensive ocean voyage, instead of setting up plantations right in Africa, only a few weeks' journey down the coast from Europe? Because they could not penetrate the strong civilizations of Africa and were terrified to venture beyond the coast. In the Americas, they could not enslave the native population because the native people knew the land and could escape from bondage. But native people going to the right place. But native people were decimated by diseases brought by Europeans and were not able to offer completely successful resistance to European coastal settlements. So the European adapted the method of slowly bleeding Africa through taking cargoes of humans from the coast and setting them to work in the alien land. I'm gonna stop right there. Did y'all want to add? Y'all had any thoughts about anything that I read? I think right now, just giving like a basic history. I have some corrections, but just a basic history of the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. But I think it's going to we go to the title, this primitive accumulation of capital. So we're looking at the start of this global this international economic system, and having an understanding, because when we look at the system that we're a part of today, it has this foundation in what's taking place in the 1400s and 1500s. I wanted to pull something up to look at in conjunction with this reading. While I'm doing that, though, if y'all had any thoughts, y'all can chime in.
Yeah, the reading, man, it explains itself like, there's a point they have in there about why African slave were more important. Okay, and they said they were taken and brought here because they couldn't run away because they didn't know the land. Unlike the African that was already here, they knew the land, they couldn't enslave them. They knew the land because if they could have, if they were going to enslave them here in their own land, they was going to escape. They were going to find a route to escape. So what they did was, so they couldn't enslave them, they killed them, and then went on a continent and bring in new set of African who did not know the land, and that will make it impossible for them to escape because it is far away from the continent and you have water body that you can't cross. You don't have the equipment, you don't have the ship to get in it. So you will be left with no option but to work. You'll be left with no option but to take the hardship. You'll be left with no option but to be raped. You'll be left with no option but to be burned. You'll be left with no option but to starve and work 24 hours. All you have to do, the only option is to succumb to my master, and for my master to do what he wants to do with me so that at least I can live. Then maybe one day I will find a way to escape. And that is why those other African, some of those African from Nigeria, the only escape route that they could escape or they found at that time, because they refused to be enslaved, they went to walk through the sea and they died through the sea. That was why they brought African here. They did not use African that was here because they would have escaped. So what they did to kill them. And that's why that's why it is so good, important to read our history, to read ourselves what we went through, because it is still happening. That is why in current today society, if an African rise up to speak against the system and they say, go back to Africa, you don't belong here because you are not contributing to the American economy. You are not contributing to the Western economy. So you don't belong here. If you don't like it here, go back to where you came from. If you don't like it here, then what are you doing here? Those are the things we receive. Those are the talks we get every day when we are talking against the system. And we are not talking against the system because we want to go against the system. We are talking against the system because the system is against us.
Did you let me see? Did you want to add anything to Sasha? I was gonna pull something
Okay,
up.
I didn't know if you were still pulling, if you were
Yeah,
getting ready to put your.
I got it, but I would if you give you an opportunity if you wanted to.
I think one of the things that stood out for me was the life expectancy when brought over to, be enslaved and overworked and worked to death. in the Caribbean was no more than 5 or 6 years. And
Yeah.
that's really important. It makes me think of a lot of things in terms of, one, when we think about population control today, in terms of, you know, people like Bill Gates, and the United States in particular, thinking about, you know, Africa being a billion plus people, and how, you know, the world, with, when you have people continuing to reproduce that you want gone, that you want to eliminate, it's an issue. And therefore, you know, you want to see what is, how can you solve that, and therefore what are the conditions that you have to create for you to be able to lower the life expectancy of a group of people. And so thinking about the things that are done today to lower the life expectancy of African people, in the same, you know, in the same way, in the same vein, when we think about enslavement and not being free, in the way that your life expectancy wasn't much. I mean, I think 5 to 6 years is a crazy number to think about, that you were only expected to live 5 to 6 years. And because of the fact that they had no, there was no value placed on, you know, the lives of African people, seen as disposable enough to not care enough to make sure that these people who are being worked to death were actual human beings that were putting in all of this labor, and that you would want to, oh, make sure that this person stays alive so that you can continue to, you know, profit off their labor. You didn't even have that thought. You didn't even see the humanity in African people to that extent, to even want to continue to make sure that they're alive so they can continue to work beyond that, because you saw it as, and as capitalism does, this ending, never ending source of humans that you can go back to Africa to go get. And just like capitalism exploits the environment and everything else on the environment, you see that it doesn't matter whether it's plants, water, it doesn't matter if it's animals, that this idea of an, you know, of everything is for Europeans and everything is for the overconsumption of Europeans, um, through capitalism, is present in this particular fact that the life expectancy was only 5 to 6 years, because in their mind, oh yeah, I can just go back and get another one. I'll just go back to the source and get, you know, and get as many more of these things as, you know, we were seeing as possible, not even seeing that these are human lives. So I think, like, just that idea, and thinking about today's time, how that's still, those things still echo, right? The inhumanity of African people, the disposability of African people, um is still present.
Nah, most definitely. And like the other piece, just real just briefly, uh when it came to the Native Americans, I mean, it's interesting when you look at uh this attempt to, enslave Native Americans, and the Europeans, such as Bartholomew de la Casa. It's crazy. Like, even when I say his name today, I'm like, yo, I remember in elementary school they was teaching us about this guy, but they never told me any of the stories that I read later on about him. But he would uh, advocate for the enslavement of Africans because of the brutality against the indigenous people, the enslavement of indigenous people, the genocide that was being committed against the indigenous people. So he was advocating the end of indigenous slavery, which was taking place, and to replace them with Africans. Now he would later recant, but it was too late. The floodgates was open. Why would you even make that call anyway? Why would you even make that statement in the first place? Uh, but with that being said, I'll go back to this. I was going to pull something up from from a text, but I'm like, we don't really have a lot of time for that. So I'm going to go to the next paragraph, and we can get into that. Bristol merchants derived profit from the slave trade, which was invested in further shipbuilding. Liverpool concentrated its slave profits in 10 trading houses, which were then responsible for the establishment of the industrial district of Lancaster, which led all of England in textile and shipbuilding in 1790. Right? Think about this industrial revolution, man, that's taking place at the same time. And Europeans will try to, you will have right wing conservative Europeans, matter of fact, all of them, who may try to argue that slavery wasn't the driving force for the industrial revolution that took place in Europe, but it was, and I can make those connections. But the history of England is comprised of the central dependence on the trade in African flesh for the primitive accumulation of capitalism. Indeed, European wars in the 16th through 18th century were fought for control and supremacy of the slave trade. The Treaty of Asiento of 1713 established the British monopoly of the slave trade after they had established their naval superiority. Such British heroes as Sir Francis Drake were knighted because of their successful piracy and gangsterism and the struggles for the treasures of African production in the Caribbean. And speaking of the central role that Britain played in the slave trade and the consequent boom of British wealth and industry, we may call into question the humanistic boast England has made in voluntarily abolishing the slave trade in the early 19th century. The reality is that Britain abolished the slave trade and began patrolling the African coast because they had already successfully populated their colonies with African laborers. The British capitalists reasoned that if they could breed African slaves in the slave colonies and stop the shipment of Africans from Africa, they would be depriving their competitors, the Spanish, Portuguese, and French, of acquiring this critical form of human capital to enrich their colonies. Indeed, during the entire early capitalist years, when commodity trading of agricultural goods was the leading economic enterprise, the critical element was the control of African labor, which produced their wealth. Britain abolished the slave trade to secure their economic advantage and nothing more. I'm gonna stop right there for the sake of time, because gotta make a hard stop at 11. But yeah, but again, just I think this is important to go. There's this revisionist history that want to make it as if the United States and well, more so Britain than the United States, right? Like they were the ones who stopped the slave trade. They if it wasn't for them, slavery would still be going on. Britain is the ones who were fighting to abolish slavery. And I think it's clear here, and when you do more research, you can see the vested interest that they had in stopping the slave trade. But they didn't end slavery, though, when it came to slavery in the British colonies, right? Where you have this contradiction where slavery is abolished, they make slavery illegal in London, but you could go to a British colony, the British colony of Jamaica, or the British colony of Guyana or Trinidad, and slavery still persists. And some of these letters is interesting too, that are being written by the plantation owners who in the colonies, who are writing back to Parliament, fighting to continue the slave trade because they're arguing that natural growth uh, isn't going to be enough to supply them with the labor that's needed in the colonies. So this also goes to the argument that Amalia Satella is making in this book, when he's stating that they stopped because they felt that the colonies, there will be this natural increase and they will be all right. So, it will be all right to end the slave trade and look like the moral nation in all of this. But in reality, no, they weren't. But I'll leave it to, you to get the last words before we close out, Frank and Natasha.
I think also one of the things too, like that I've found through research was that the British also, one of the driving reasons was because in the Caribbean, because of all of the uprisings that were happening and the revolts that were happening in the Caribbean, it was threatening the economic gains that Britain was getting from enslavement. So it came to the point where if the British didn't end enslavement, in that particular, in the particular kind of way of going and getting more, and we getting more Africans from the continent, that the economic gains that they were getting from the system of capitalism and enslavement was not going to be beneficial, because as we know, in the Caribbean, African people outnumbered the European plantation owners, and we know that they were revolting, burning down plantations, marooning. And so for the British, that was also another reason, not because they wanted to end enslavement, but because they were getting so much hell from Africans revolting in all of these different places, that if they didn't end it in the process, that they were going to end up not benefiting economically in the way that they were from enslavement.
Yeah, and I'm just going to connect that to the current global issue that is going on, because it fits directly into it. Last week or last 2 weeks, what did we see? We saw the Treasury Department, the Secretary for the Treasury Department of the U.S., Janet Yellen. Where did she go? China. Why did she go to China? To build a relationship. In fact, they have the relationship, but to make sure the relationship between the U.S. and China, it does not depreciate. Why would they do that and then go to the African continent and tell African leaders to start making business with China? But here they're going to China, and she was not the only person that went there. I think the Secretary of State, Blinken, also went there. So why are they trying to maintain now relationship with China? In fact, when she went there, when Janet Yellen was in China, she made it clear the debt that America owed to China, okay, and the American economy, all right, it is because of China as well currently, okay, because most of their businesses are in China. Most of their products are coming from China. For example, look at the meat, the lab-grown meat. It is being sold to China. So their money are coming from China. So she went there to beg the Chinese government. And she said, these are two super world power. They cannot afford to split. So why will you go to China, begging China, okay, to strengthen your relationship? But you telling African people, the Chinese are bad. The Chinese are wicked. Do not be friend with the Chinese. Leave the Chinese people. Do not be friend. Come to our side. Do not go to the Chinese. The Chinese are overtaking your land. The Chinese are there to exploit you. Do not be friends with them. But here you are friends with them. You are building your relationship. You don't want for that relationship to spoil. But you are telling Chinese, you are telling Africa, hey, the Chinese are bad, the Chinese are wicked. Do not be friends. Don't go to them. Do you see how they play it? So that fit into this narrative that the colonizer, okay, or the enslaver and the slave trade, they didn't end it because they always see beyond. They always see what good for them and try to work out what good for them so that it cannot damage their interest. So when they saw it that, like you guys said, when they saw it that, bringing more slave in was going to cause problem or was creating problem because the slave here was already causing problem. So they have to stop the slave trade, but continue with the slave, or trade within the system.
No, absolutely. And it's this history, like England, when they came and colonized the Americas, one of the it's a guy, Richard Hakulik, he writes this like reasonings for colonizing the Americas to the Queen at the time, I think Queen Elizabeth at the time. Part of the reason was, hey, look at what Spain is doing, because there's something called the Black Legend, and Spain was so brutal to the Native Americans. They're spreading Catholicism. Look, we have to come in here and save these indigenous people from the evil Spanish, right? but they come and displace the indigenous people and commit genocide themselves, and develop this philosophy of manifest destiny, where they even reason or rationalize why they should take their land and why they should wipe the Americas of indigenous people, and wouldn't apologize hundreds of years later, wouldn't even apologize for their acts, right? What's done is done. That's the sort of mindset they have. But just the point of, always trying to point the finger at other nations, and and tell the very people that they are oppressing and exploiting, hey, you don't want to go over there and mess with those people. Those people are bad. But then you find yourself in a relationship with them where you're being exploited and oppressed all the same. So with that being said, we have to work in our own interests. We have to think African first, and our relationship should be based on, how it benefits us, and not, how it benefits someone else, and how someone else feels about our relationships. And this has, historically got our leaders in trouble. A lot of our leaders was assassinated because they went against U.S. interests and then their own interests. But this is a price that we have to be willing to pay if we want to liberate ourselves from colonialism. So with that being said, got a hard stop, man. I want to appreciate everybody for joining us this morning and being a part of this conversation. We're here most Saturdays if there's something not going on, because we are active, organizing. Sometimes things come up. We may be traveling, but we want to. We're still going to continue to do these Saturdays though at 10 a.m. And these book readings, and then you can check out some of our other podcasts. Frank is going to be on tomorrow. You want to give him a quick plug before we close, right? You want to let them know?
So as you all know, the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series has switched from Saturday 10 a.m. to Sunday 1 p.m. So come there, come to church, great in the gospel, come and get the gospel. I'm not asking you to bring offering. I'm not asking you to bring tithe. Come and get the gospel, okay? Come and be healed. Come and be liberated.
Right on. For sure, for sure. You had any last words, Natasha? Let people know anything?
No, free them all. That's it.
Free them all.
Work to fight to help release political prisoners. Go online, look them up. Go to the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition Facebook page, where you can find the link to our website, and also you can go to the Jericho movement. And also, the Spirit of Mandela is working on building a People's Senate, where different organizations from around the U.S. come together to work on issues that are affecting us as a people, in conjunction with each other. So, and this weekend they're having an actual whole weekend of different things. So if you just go online and you type in the Spirit of Mandela, there's a website and everything, and you can go ahead and you can get that information as well. So,
all right, appreciate that. All right, so until next time, make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Peace, y'all.
peace.